Hello everyone. We'll just give it 5 minutes so that people have time to join up. Sorry about my terrible camera. Good evening. You can't hear me? Excellent. Can you hear me now? Megan Hunter, blah, blah, blah. Hi Megan.
Oh, I'm the other way around.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm
Can
good.
you hear me okay?
Sorry?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, because of my terrible camera, you can't really see me, but that's fine by me.
It's a kind of appropriately misty image.
Yeah, it's just the filth in my house. That's all it is. So I think we might just give people a couple of minutes to join up. I think that's what we do. I've never done this before, so apologies anyone watching if I'm doing it wrong. But there's quite a lot of comments and stuff, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try and note down if people have questions. So if I look a bit mad, that's what I'm doing. So yes, and we only have 1 hour, so we're going to have to, we get cut off after an hour, so we'll have to end quite abruptly.
I'll keep an eye.
We just give them until 32 past. That's what the last lady did. That
just hold
doing,
up. Advertise.
Oh yeah. Cousins. Beautiful cover.
Oh, yours too. So lovely.
Okay, well maybe we should just start because this is really weird. So what we thought we'd do, me and Megan had a little chat, and we thought that we would introduce ourselves and do a very short reading, because this is supposed to be like a conversation, and there aren't many conversations where the other person just spontaneously reads from their novels. So get that out of the way and then we can just have a chat. So I'll go first. I'm Evie Wyld, and my latest book is The Bass Rock, which is this one, which is all backwards and you can't see it anyway. And it published in March, just a week before lockdown, which was great. And it's a sort of multi-timelined, quite messy book about violence against women, which makes it sound like a hoot. Hopefully it's, you know, a bit bouncier than that. Part of it's set in the 1700s with a girl called Sarah who is being hunted by men who think she's a witch. And then there's a part in the 1950s with a young housewife coming to terms with her husband, who's different from how she imagined. And then there's a very thinly veiled portrait of myself in the present day, who is clearing out the house of the 1950s housewife after her death and finding sort of dark things in the house and secrets and stuff. And out of laziness, really, so I don't have to do too much sort of background, I'm just going to read the very first page, about 4 minutes. I was 6 and just the two of us, my mother and I, took Bowie for a walk along the beach where she and Dad grew up, the shore a mix of black rock and pale cold sand. It was always cold. Even in summer, we wore wool jumpers, and our noses ran and became scorched with wiping on our sleeves. But this was November, and the wind made the dog walk close to us, her ears flat, her eyes squinted. I could see the top layer of sand skittering away so that it looked like a giant bedsheet billowing. We were looking for cowrie shells among the debris of the tide line. I had 2 digging into my palm, white like the throat of a herring gull. My mother had a keener eye and held 6. I felt the pull of victory slackening. Resting in a rock pool was a black suitcase, bulging at the sides. The zip had split, and where the teeth no longer held together, I saw 2 fingers tipped with red nails and 1 grey knuckle, where a 3rd finger should have been. The stump of the finger, like the miniature plaster hand I had for my doll's house. The colour had been sucked from the knuckle by seawater, leaving just a cool grey and the white of the bone. It was the bone, I suppose, that made it so much like the tiny ham. I moved my arm to swat something away from my face, and as I did, flies rose and from the suitcase in a cloud, thick and heavy. Behind me, my mother. Another one, she called. I found another one. And then the smell, like a dead cat in the chimney in summer, a smell so tall and so broad that you can't see over or around it. My mother walked up behind me. What's... I kept looking at the fingers and trying to understand. My mother pulling me by the arm. Come away, she said, and spitting over and over into the sand. Don't look, come away. But the more I looked, the more I saw, and peeking through the gaps between the white fingers was an eye that seemed to look back at me, that seemed to know something about me and ask a question and give an answer. In the memory, which is a child's memory and unreliable, the eye blinks. Your turn.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Well, hello, I'm Megan Hunter, and I read from my book, The Harpy, which is, it's about centrally a couple whose marriage is in trouble after the wife discovers that her husband is having an affair, and they make a rather strange pact that she will hurt him 3 times in retaliation. And then the wife begins to change. So I'm also going to read from close to the beginning of the book, just a few minutes. It happened on a Friday, the boys in their last rhythm of the week, me trying to stay steady for them, a ship in dock, something you could hardly see the end of. I picked them up from school, administering snacks, absorbing shreds of their days, the wrappers from their sweets. It was almost midwinter. The sun was setting as we walked home, dying down against the playing field at the back of our house. Birds flew away from us, crayoned lines against the colours. Back then, I was always hearing flocks of geese over our roof, feeling as if I lived on a marsh instead of at the edge of a small, rich town. I would close my eyes and feel it, the green ooze of the earth's water rising through my skin. If anyone ever finds out, I know what they will conclude.
Oh, there you go.
I think my phone timed out, so I'm going to tap it.
There's a pregnant pause.
Yeah. I am an awful person, and they, the finder, are a good person, a kind, large-hearted, pleasant person, attractive with a nice smell. This person, this woman, perhaps, would never do the things that I have done. She would never even try. The boys were happy that day. There were no dramas, no small children lying in the middle of the road. When they were younger, I was constantly picking them up from the pavement, facing the possibility that I would be stuck on the journey for a minute more, an hour more, a week. The eldest, Paddy, never got over the birth of his brother, and when he was younger, he raged daily, making it seem as they would be stuck in that moment forever. Just before I found out, I had started to feel that the children were creatures I'd released from a cage. They were suddenly free, agile beings, looping around me. Paddy especially had a new internal quiet that I'd come to recognise as a self, thoughts that were beginning to form dense and mysterious places, whole worlds I would never know about. That afternoon he was being kind to his little brother, his gentleness a relief like a blessing, Ted so keen at every moment to stay in his good light, the almost mystical clearness of it, like sunshine at the bottom of a swimming pool. They were collecting sticks, fir cones. Ted had rolled up the bottom of his school jumper, was placing them in the bunched material, his little fingers pink with cold. Put your gloves on. After 7 years, the phrases had long become empty, but I still used them. It seemed odd that I had to monitor the children's discomfort, rather than simply accepting that they did not care, that they maybe even liked the sensation. Flesh turned to ice, numb and tingling. As we walked past the field, the sun was burning to death, so low we could almost look right at it. Ted clung to me, and it was terrifying when you thought about it. A ball of fire so close to our home. I'll stop there.
Lovely.
We're still here.
It's so nice to hear that, having reread your book in the last couple of days, and just I sort of got to the end of it about 2 hours ago for the second time, and then like starting again is really lovely, having those two parts of her. And it was really interesting going back to it, because I read it first, I don't know, about sort of 9 months ago maybe, and the thing that I hadn't quite remembered was the infidelity. The anger was all already there. It was just that was like a way of delivering it, which was so interesting. And there were so many beautiful moments that I really recognised as a wife and a mother, whatever that means, that I hadn't been able to articulate. And, you know, not being in the same situation as Jake and Lucy are, but that wonderful moment that you get in the best novels where somebody has put into words a feeling that's in your chest. And so basically my questions for you are going to be more like, just, I don't really have questions because your book answers them, but I just want to talk about it. So I just wondered, like, if you could talk a little bit about what infidelity means for Lucy at this moment in her life, like other than the kind of obvious betrayal. Does that make sense?
I think in a way, you know, what it means in the book is that it's not simply about their relationship, about the two of them. It's obviously it's about it being expanded beyond that, but particularly about Jake having a life beyond the home that Lucy have, and about, you know, her, it ends up encapsulating that feeling of entrapment that she has, and that feeling of containment. I mean, she's a particular person, so she, you know, she's studied a lot, she attempted a PhD, and then she's ended up kind of very much being around housework and childcare. And I mean, she does work, she works part-time, you know, the children are a bit older, so it's not that kind of first flush of, you know, nappies and but she's still, you know, as many women are, kind of put in that position where basically her life is around the home, whereas even though he also has children, he very much has a life outside of the home. I think, and that rage, you know, which you would think is maybe, you know, we think of it, we always say sort of 1950s housewives, don't we? Or we talk about, you know, the feminine mystique, or as though, you know, decades and decades ago, and we're sort of through that now. But I think that was one of the things that I wanted to explore is, you know, have we really overcome that kind of, you know, gender segregation, the woman at home largely and the man sort of out and about, you know, obviously everybody's different, but this was exploring where that setup is still in place. So yeah, no, I'm glad that it kind of resonated for you. I think I although it's not, you know, straightforwardly an autobiographical book, I kind of delve into the sort of texture of my own life, kind of, yeah.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because you always have to put a little a disclaimer. You always feel like, I think, especially as a female writer, you have to go, not me. But I think,
I think it's so interesting. Go on.
No, So I
Oh,
think we've got a
am I
bit of a
gone away?
delay. Are you still there?
Okay, I'm still here. Here I am.
You're still there. Okay, I'm still here too. I was just going to say that it feels like there's a particular horror of women who leave their children that doesn't exist for, you know, the natural way of things. If a couple breaks up, is the man leaves, and that's sad, but it's kind of you can deal with it. Whereas when Lucy, you know, without wanting to spoil anything, when Lucy sort of leaves, there's a really visceral horror that, you know, what will happen to her children. And of course you kind of go, well, the dad's still there, so it should be the same balance, but it just isn't.
Yes, no, I think I'm also fascinated by that question. And, you know, I always wanted to kind of assure the reader that the children are perfectly safe, the children are fine, and they're very looked after. And it's not a story about, you know, children in peril, but it is a story about a woman, you know, in some ways doing what many men do, you know, needing to have some time away from her children. But yes, I think the sort of autobiographical nature and the disclaimer thing is something I've thought about a lot in the lead up to publication, and to what extent, you know, one becomes identified with one's work if one writes something that could in some way be, you know, mapped onto one's own life. I haven't, you know, invented lots of things or gone into you know, lots of different people's heads. And that was actually something that I was so you know, transfixed by in your book is, I mean, just the totally, you know, the amazing wide ranging, going across hundreds of years of time. It's, you know, it's quite mind blowing, and it's done so effortlessly. And I wanted to see seamless transition there. I wanted to ask you about, you know, how kind of, again, it's similar. I don't know, you know, how helpful like questions are per se, but I wanted to talk to you. I'm so intrigued to be able to talk to you about how that felt to be layering those different time periods on top, and how you felt about the reader encountering those, and kind of whether you felt nervous about whether the reader, I mean, I didn't feel as a reader that I got lost at all, but there are no, so did you always know you were going to have, weren't going to kind of signpost it in that way?
I'm quite a fan of making it quite complicated. I think part of my process is getting very, very lost in, you know, writing too much and going off on different tangents, and just having a huge block of text, and then finding my way out in some kind of sense is the kind of the last process, almost like, you know, normally about 6 months from the end. And I think, I don't know, I'm really interested in the reader. Well, I don't think about the reader in a particularly generous way. I don't kind of think, how can I hold someone's hand over this tricky terrain? What I find exciting about reading and writing is the idea that every single reader brings their own life experience to every novel they read, and so they fill in gaps. And so in a way, you know, it might sound like quite a kind of lazy excuse, but the confusion is part of it. I want there to be strange things next to each other. I want them not to necessarily make sense to everyone, but maybe somebody will find a thread between them. And I think, I think to me that's the excitement that's in there, is putting different things next to each other and seeing what that third space that appears is.
I found that really exciting. I felt that. I mean, again, I've read it twice now, and I felt perhaps even more the second time, that I could really feel those sort of tensions and those kind of lovely kind of atmospheres between the different time periods. And it's really interesting when you have people who are related as well. So you're almost feeling like kind of passage of time and this intergenerational kind of relationships, and sort of the complexity of time, isn't it? When you look back at your ancestors and your, you know, because I've heard you talk about the book in terms of your own family and your own is it your grandmother? Yeah. And I could feel that. I mean, not in a sort of autobiographical way, but I could feel the texture of that, as you say, in the in-between places, in the silences, in the gaps. So people talk about silences and gaps and, you know, lacuna kind of in short novels, don't they, and fragmented novels, but this is a novel that's really long, well, quite long. I mean, I write incredibly short books. Like, I'm quite now when people are saying that this is short, you know, I'm like, this is really long. This is like, but obviously still, you know, still in the sort of novella type territory. But I mean, did you feel, I was quite interested again, I suppose, with the difference. I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to the kind of overlaps between the books, but this is a point of difference, I guess. But did you feel when you were writing as though you had lots of space, and kind of did you feel a sort of, I think that's my fantasy of writing along, I would feel this sort of expansiveness, and that I would feel as though I had a lot of room to roam around. Did you feel like that, or not really?
Well, I think my fantasy is basically writing your book, so we just swap lives for like something concise and beautiful, and it doesn't take 7 years, preferably. That would be also good. I think because I was writing it with a very new baby, I just didn't have the time to think too hard about what I was writing about. So it was just sitting down at a desk while he was having a nap and writing, and whatever came out, it was just like, stick that on the pile, we'll come back to it later. And there are, throughout the book, there are a series of murders or violences towards women throughout time, and they're like little vignettes. And so those I had about sort of 20 more of those, and I wasn't really sure what they were, but all I knew was that you know, perhaps being in that exhausted state, you become quite angry. I think you become hyper aware of people looking at you, and you describe it so beautifully in your book about you know, this is not a country where people love children, and how you have to stare straight ahead and not catch anyone's eye, and the sort of rage that kind of that festers away with that. So I think for me it was not thinking about it as a novel, just thinking about it as I have to write something, because I have to keep my my toe in the water, because otherwise it all slips away. I think there was a bit of sort of panic of like feeling like I'd sort of left my writing career a bit, mainly because people tell you all the time as a woman, as soon as you have kids, so you know, the pram in the hallway and all that sort of stuff, and they're like, well, you know, that's the last book you'll write, kind of thing. And they actually not trying to be nasty either, just as a fact.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, did you feel as though with the baby, kind of, in your acknowledgements are so beautiful, you say kind of actually holding the baby hand when you're writing, and did you feel, having, you know, a little baby with you, that you wanted to write away from that kind of, because the book isn't, I mean, it has kind of some pregnancies and some, there's, you know, there's baby references, but there's not a kind of, it's not the main theme of the novel. Did you feel like you wanted to
I think I was nervous of being like, guys, I've had a baby. Do you know what I mean? That kind of novel. But also I think having a child makes you very aware of your own parents, and what was done to them and what was done to their parents, you know, the sort of telescoping, very much in it's the same with death. I think when my father died, my brother had twins quite soon afterwards, and I had this, like a week afterwards, I had this really weird moment of just being like, the mothership has gone, but these escape pods have like shot out into the world. And I think it does just make you very aware of history, because you know, because you're going to be dead at some point and not seeing this baby anymore, and this child or whatever. And it's a cheery thing to say, but
no, it's
yeah, I think that's where that came from. And what about you? Do you, because the end we start from is that shorter than the Harpy?
Yeah, the end we
start amazing.
About half the length of the
So jealous.
well, we have a bit
But
of
do you
Sorry.
Do they sort of come to you as fully formed, like, I'm going to write about a woman who is a harpy, or is there like loads of dead ends on your cutting room floor? Like, are there thousands of words somewhere that we don't see, or does it all come out as succinctly as it seems?
I mean, basically, there's lots and lots and lots of dead ends, but they're actually other books. So I start lots and lots and lots of books. I have quite a lot of ideas,
yeah,
most of which are really bad. And then I'm, you know, when I'm in this actually horrible, kind of quite painful period where I'm just trying to write a novel, I go through a phase where I start new books all the time, and it's really horrible. I mean, I imagine it's a bit like cycling in like different relationships. I don't know. Like that's sort of, and then breaking up and then getting together, you know, go through this, you know, you go through this kind of love, you know, honeymoon phase where you're like, this is the one, and then you know, and then you come back to it and you're disillusioned. And I'm not going to carry on with this metaphor, but and then discarded. So, but it's I think that's what happens basically. And actually, then we started off as part of another book. That's where that one came from. The Harpy didn't originally have the Harpy dimension. So it started with the premise of the 3 times betrayal kind of fairy tale sort of structure. So I was really interested in just exploring. I thought that it sounded really bizarre and really kind of, in a way, unrealistic. And I was interested to kind of make it work realistically and to kind of say, what happens when people decide that they're gonna, because people do, you know, they decide I'm gonna sort of put this structure onto my life, but lives are kind of messy and, you know, formless. I think, and people decide I'm gonna, you know, like I've got a 5-year plan, or let's do this, fix our marriage, I'll hurt you 3 times, you know. I was playing around with that, and I wrote most of a first draft, and then the Harpy began to emerge, as it were, and just kind of came to be this very essential part of the text towards the end of the first draft. And then in the next draft, you know, it was much more central.
And did you study classics at university, or like was the Harpy a big part of your life, like growing up? I know you mentioned that storybook.
Yeah, I mean, the storybook does kind of exist, but it was a storybook that I found around the time that I was writing the book.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's so, and also I didn't study classics, and I didn't grow up with the Harpy. So that was all a backstory that I gave as a kind of, you know, explanation of her obsession. But I did become quite obsessed with the figure of the Harpy, and I was spending a lot of time. I wrote the whole book in a library, and I was spending a lot of time, you know, researching and reading about harpies and reading all the accounts I could find, pictures, sculptures, you know, plates and everything, because I felt very kind of inhabited by this creature. I really did. I felt it quite viscerally, and when I was writing some of the more, no spoilers, but visceral parts, I actually felt that in my own body. So I knew that it was an important part of the text, but the obsession was, you know, came into being with the book, rather than being you know, a lifelong obsession. But I'm glad that you might think that.
No, I looked up the book and I could not get it. I was really annoyed, so I wanted to see a picture of her face.
The book is like in this drawer by my desk.
Is it?
I can get it out. So it's called The Unicorn in the Sea.
Yes.
And it's actually, these are the harpies. I don't know if they'll be able to see, but.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they're
brilliant, aren't they?
Yeah, they're very kind of, you know.
Do you often sort of use images while you're writing as inspiration, or just something to focus on, to flavour stuff with?
I think this book was a very visual book in that way. So because I always had, like, I submitted a kind of very rough, you know, a first draft just as a Word document, which had a kind of cover page. I mean, probably my editors were like, what is this? It was a big picture of basically a harpy. Different to this, but, you know, this is literal. But I always knew that I don't know, it had that sort of visual component. I'm interested in kind of putting the visual together. I'd love, you know, in the past I've sort of played around with photography and things like that. I'm not very, very good, but that would probably be my fantasy. And, you know, in one day would be to kind of write something that combined the visual and the, and the,
oh, lovely. Yeah.
I mean, there's a very strong motif in your book with the kind of fruit and food and plums. And this was something, I don't know if you've had this question before, and I don't know if it seems like a strange thing to pick out, but I became really kind of intrigued, especially on the second reading. I was really noticing it by your use of food in the book, as in the things that women eat, the things they don't eat, the meals they cook, and kind of the way you describe. It's one of my sort of bugbears in fiction that not many books have cooking, food. I mean, obviously some do, you know, but toilets. But you know, let's just face it. So you know, particularly Viv, she has this thing of making this, you know, often these fish products and these pasta doesn't sound very nice, fish products. I actually think the meals sound really nice, the sort of prawn sandwich.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's basically a window into my eating disorder, Megan. It's just like, I think the sort of disordered eating is really interesting, and I think Lucy does it too. You know, she gets this enormous hunger and has to, like, there's a bit of her just spooning leftovers into a gob from the fridge, and like, it's so unaccepted as something that women would do. You know, if women are upset, they're supposed to get very thin, and that's how you can tell that they're very upset. And I think just that trying to fill yourself up with something, trying to distract yourself from something, and trying to allay the boredom is like interesting. And like, I don't know if you've ever found yourself just mindlessly eating something and you look at it and you're just like, I don't even remember picking this up. It's just and I find that fascinating. And the things that in restaurants, you know, if you're out with friends or a date or whatever, the kind of anxiety about, like, I don't know, I would be interested to know how many women eat what they want to actually eat in a restaurant, rather than go, I want to find out what he's eating first, because I don't want to be like, I'm going to have a starter and a main meal and and I don't know, there's so much emotion around food, and I, you know, I love food and I love cooking and I love reading about food, and I know what you mean. It does feel left out, and how quickly, you know, for example, eggs can turn into such a marker of personality. I in my real life, I would use boiled eggs to find out how much I fancied someone. And if, you know, if they ate a boiled egg and I could watch them eat a boiled egg and still fancy them, it was like, okay. Even though I would happily eat boiled egg on my own, but I couldn't have anyone watching me, you know.
No, eggs are quite visceral and they're quite kind of difficult. No, I think I'm really interested in this kind of the place of women eating and or not eating, and how that kind of there's an acceptable maybe disordered eating, which is not eating, but probably
exactly.
People have the other kind of disordered eating where they comfort eat or stress eat, you know, mindlessly eat.
And people assume that they're jolly instead of depressed.
Just happily just eating, and it's often, if it's described, it's often in a kind of, I don't know, like a joke way, like sit down and eat a whole pint of Ben and Jerry's, or you sit down and, you know, I don't know, I don't really like sweet things, you know, so I found all that kind of the pasta and the and kind of what that symbolizes as well, that somehow I'm a bit obsessed with this bit at the end where Ruth of your novel, where Ruth has this fantasy life that she says that she wants to become a hermit who will, I'm going to read it, grow fat and squat and strong, drink whiskey and wear gum. And then the whole thing about catching fish, and I don't know, it goes on. It's so brilliant.
Thank you.
Actually, this time of reading it, I felt really pained by that, and fact that she, as described, doesn't, I mean, in some ways
she doesn't manage it,
but she doesn't really live that life, does she?
No, I think because, like, as you mentioned earlier, the that particular strand is kind of based on my British grandmother, who in later life had a sort of anorexia that I think a lot of quite elderly people get, where it's just complete disinterest in food, and so she always, when I knew her, looked like a skeleton. And then looking back at pictures of her when she was younger, and she seemed so full of life and kind of interested, and these stories of her being a really good cook. So that was sort of something that I kind of had in the back of my mind. But I also think this idea of hermiting yourself, and kind of what Lucy does at the end, you know, turning into a harpy, hermits yourself quite quite effectively, like just going, I can happily be on my own and be self-contained and be strong, and if I don't know anyone, I don't have to worry about anyone, I don't have a responsibility to anyone, I don't have to put on a frock and maintain some kind of idea of myself. So I think, yeah, it's sort of a, I guess it's a figure that I've always been interested in. I think my last book, All the Birds Singing, the main character in that kind of is that woman that Ruth describes, and it is just so out of reach of her, you know, one, not being Australian, and two, living when she does.
Yeah.
So no, yeah, I think the sort of the women who make the choice to not have kids and to not have a relationship, that fascinates me, and I, part of me, you know, just while my husband and child are upstairs, really envy it in a lot of ways. You know, it's not, I admire it so much, and I think it's really interesting, and there's so much power there.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated by also the time where, I mean, this is different from Ruth, I guess, and more, I mean, both Ruth and kind of Viv, actually. Viv has that real kind of solitude, that experience of solitude, which I guess is different when it's a more, you know, familiar experience, because the way that I experienced solitude, I guess, across the last 10 years is as this really potent experience. You know, to be alone is this really kind of beautiful thing. And, you know, I mean, saying that, I think I've always been, I need to kind of query my own statement, because I think I've always found solitude quite powerful. Even I remember feeling like that at university, because there are always I was going to say there are always people to get away from, and there's always, you know, there's you know, there's family, there's, you know, it's not, kind of being not alone doesn't just happen if you've got kids. But I think in the Harpy, I was interested in exploring that, you know, that very acute sense of solitude that you can have when you're really not used to it, and when you're people invading your space to such a kind of unboundaried, you know, level, which the kids kind of climbing all over you, and, you know.
I think Lucy even says that directly, doesn't she? She says, like, she's always been someone who's needed a lot of solitude.
And I think it's interesting when someone who's like that, again, you know, straying into the thinly veiled autobiographical territory, someone who's like that has kids, you know, and has a family, but they are someone who values being alone. I mean, I guess being a writer, I found, as that's developed, that's kind of ideal for that, because my job is to be alone. She says. Yeah. Apart from at moments like this, I'm still alone. But, you know, we would be actually in a busy where did book events even happen? Bookshops.
I have no idea.
I forgot. But yeah.
You mentioned earlier about like the harpy kind of inhabiting you, and you felt her quite bodily. And I was thinking about the book. It's quite a, I mean this in a very good way. It's quite a smelly book, and like there's a lot of stuff about the body, and like in particular how a woman interacts with her own flesh after having children. And it feels like a sort of further separation between her and Jake, that he's described as this clean, youthful skinned, boyish person with clean underwear. Imagine that. And there are these really harrowing descriptions of Lucy's like infected C-section scar. And I just wondered, like, how aware were you of, like, was that quite a natural thing, or were you just like, he is this, he sort of seems to embody someone who can just go out and have an affair, and then when she sees a moment where she thinks, I might be able to get a snog out of this man with the lovely hairy arms, and then it's pointed out to her that, why would he fancy you? There's just this incredible tearing in the middle of it. Don't really know what my question is. I just love that, the balance of that, and the deeply unfair thing that Lucy doesn't get to have her righteous rage. It's always taken away from her, like her mum who tells her she needs to pray to God if she feels angry, and then her kind of confronting Jake about his infidelity, and his response isn't what she expects. He's angry at her for finding out. And just like, and every time she hurts him, it's like, you know, he is so wounded emotionally, but and it's so unsatisfying for her. I don't know, it's
I feel though anger for a woman, I mean, it's hopefully changing, but I think anger is still quite an unacceptable emotion. Actually, we don't like to see being angry, see women being angry, and that's unattractive, that's unpleasant. And for me, the harpy in you know, just as a symbol was so perfect for that, because the harpy is, you know, it's all these things in one, kind of vicious and vindictive and really angry, and then, you know, spiteful, and then there's definite repulsion, and kind of often actually the harpies are talked about their smelling disgusting, being repulsive.
Really?
Yeah. And then in some descriptions there's stuff about them being seductive and beautiful, you know, but that's I mean, that I would like to ask you about that actually, but that's almost another aspect of their, you know, kind of denigration. But yeah, I think it's true, she's not allowed in the book, she's not really, I mean, hopefully the reader is able to feel her anger, and the anger comes, but in terms of its expression, there isn't really legitimate, you know. And she talks about these kind of film narratives of, you know, cutting up his shirts, or, you know, that we're presenting kind of sometimes these angry, vengeful women, particularly after affairs. And maybe that's why I was interested in the affair as a trope, because maybe that's one narrative kind of trope where we do see angry women, but perhaps the anger again is very, you know, boundaried and sort of contained. Angry women is definitely a unifying theme in our book. Really, anger of women. And I mean, I think, you know, I felt very angry reading your book, and yeah, there's a huge sense in it of the injustices and the, you know, the hundreds and hundreds of years of women being, you know, exploited, maimed, killed, raped by men. And there's a particular moment which I think is quite often quoted, but I think, you know, so powerful, where Maggie, who's such an interesting character, if we've got time to talk about Maggie, but tells Viv that the most common age to be murdered is 36 to 45. My eyebrow shot up as well, because I'm now 36. So they finished breeding with us, but we are still fuckable. So that's the most common age for women to be murdered by men. I mean, it's so horrifying. I've heard talk about a particular map, an Australian map, which about killings of women by men. And I mean, I suppose, you know, opening it up to you, you know, how, I mean, it's obviously, it's not a sort of hobby, it's not an interest of yours, but it's something that preoccupied you, that to the extent you found that was what you wanted to write about. I mean, where did that begin? Or
well, I mean, it partly that map, which is a map written, kind of compiled by a journalist called Sherelle Moody, whose father was a serial killer and killed a load of women. She's now a fantastic journalist, and she has this map called, I think it's called the Red Heart Campaign, and she just documents every time the body of a woman or child is found murdered. And the most astounding thing is just how many of them are just unknown female. You know, where she can, she puts in a photograph of them and backstory, and if they caught the person who did it, but it just was this huge kind of, you know, the numbers are so startling. And when you, because I'm so bad at numbers, I react very well to an infographic, and it just it just was so confronting, I think, and so alarming that there is no official link between them. You know, the phrase is an isolated incident with no further threat to the public, and it's like, well, clearly not, because you know, look at it all, and it's all connected, and it's all sort of society's witch hunt, I guess. It was kind of that sort of thinking that fueled the book, I think, and also this idea that we're supposed to, you know, today we're supposed to be living in this time where our parents kind of burnt bras and, you know, fought for equality and all this stuff, and I think we were brought up to expect a lot more than what we've got, and so it's kind of like, it can be a bit of a crushing disappointment, which makes one rather cross.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I think that's what I kind of kept feeling like, it's, you know, it's still like this, you know, reading those books of, I suppose you would say, the first wave, Betty Friedan and Adrienne Rich, I really love, who writes Of Woman Born, about motherhood, and she writes so much about the sort of unnecessary isolation of a woman with children. You know, she wrote that in the 1970s, and it's like, you know, have things really changed? Insane. And I guess now, I mean, I don't want to kind of make it topical, but I have been thinking a lot about, I guess we probably all have, about isolation, and about you know, particularly that now we're in the situation kind of mandated by the government, you know, quite rightly, obviously we all want to do everything we can, but we have to stay in our family bubbles, we have to be, you know, family units, and the family, and, you know, it's kind of taken away from all of its other connections, nuclear family, and, you know, even its wider family connections. But that's me slightly going off on one. Do you think, are we meant, I can't really see any questions.
Well, I think the incels got involved, so I turned comments off.
Okay.
So I don't know if I dare turn them back on. What will be waiting for us?
I didn't know that happened.
So
we could just keep chatting.
We can just keep rambling. I think we've got 10 minutes.
What about Maggie then? I mean, do you feel like Maggie? I mean, I guess this is an impossibility, and I know that she doesn't entirely, but do you feel that she does partially kind of escape from some of the?
Yeah, I feel like in a way she is the woman who has managed to become a hermit and wear boots and drink the whiskey. I think she that when sex work is sort of not done correctly, that's the wrong way of putting it, but when it is not exploitative, I can see what power it holds, and how it you know, it's a totally valid way of making a living. And I think she is really kind of cottoned onto that, and kind of, she lives very much day to day, and does exactly the things she wants. She's the person in the restaurant who would order the things she wants to eat. And so I suppose she was, in my head, she was the person, who had kind of escaped, but, you know, escaped into what is kind of the question, I guess. But she's escaped the kind of relationship, the children, the expectation that's put on her. And of course that's got its own problems, in that she lives quite a dangerous life, not just because of her job, but because she could freeze to death on the golf course. and I think, she's just sort of someone who sort of both irritated and I admired. I think that was, and I think there's something there that often when women are taking what they are kind of is rightfully theirs, there is this kind of slight kind of twitch of irritation, even in other women, you know, because it's so bred into us that, you know, we don't take, we are given. So I think that's where she came from. I wanted to make sure though that she's kind of like a pixie dream girl, but hopefully with some of the shine of that scraped off her. She's as irritating as that, but but also you know, sort of a bit smelly and I guess a bit.
I remember descriptions of her kind of her hairy legs, or her, you know, things. I mean, things kind of not. She doesn't have any of those, and I mean, her life is dangerous. But then she's also the one, and because of that, I guess she's the one that points out the danger, like at the beginning where the man is hiding under Viv's car. I mean, it's so horrifying, that moment, and kind of, actually, it was really good, you could say, or really bad companion to your book. I mean, as in, your book's incredible, and I was watching this Netflix series called The Fall, which is number one on Netflix, but it's just relentless violence against women. You know, and
by a very, very attractive man.
By a sexy man. A bit of the other program too. And I mean, I don't know, what was kind of driving me to, you know, keep watching this, but well, it's interesting, I suppose. But you know, it's this kind of relentless, almost kind of addiction to seeing women in these positions of kind of fear. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that feels really radical and interesting and kind of exciting in your novel is that there is violence against women, and that happens, but it's not told from a kind of glamorizing or, you know, reveling, or that's not
thank you.
It's completely, you know, from the other, and that moment, yes, there's the scary man under the car, but you know, there's actually a moment where one woman protects another woman from that, and so many
about connection. I think so much of that was about you know, women being very concerned that they're being they need to be polite at all times, so you might not want to sort of shout out to someone, there's a man behind your car, in case it's like, you know, the first thing that you do is you run through a list of alternative things rather than just going, that looks dangerous and creepy, let's warn someone. So I guess that's, for me, that felt like the hopeful thing finishing the book, was like women talking about their experiences is powerful. And and we're about to run out of time. I'm just aware that we don't get cut off halfway through. But your book, The Harpy, comes out on the 3rd of September, doesn't it? I'm so excited. It's gonna win everything.
Well, it's, you know, it's obviously, there's things everywhere about how it's, I don't know, there's so many books coming out the same and you know, but it is a moment which a huge amount of things are kind of coalescing into one week. It's back to school and kind of, but it's no, it feels very good, I think, to have it finally kind of materialize and be out there. The process that you go through, and that you would know more about than me, you know, 3-4 books, kind of of writing and then publishing and then merging from publishing and how have you been finding that kind of in lockdown? Have you been finding it's a good time to kind of write or publish?
I've hardly written anything since lockdown. I mean, partly because, you know, the schools have been closed. So what about you?
I mean, I think there was a time when my book was put off, and I felt like I did have a bit of a because my husband sort of works mostly afternoons and evenings, so I can kind of work on it. So I had a little bit of kind of breathing space around then. But I do think with publishing that, you know, publishing and creating for me feel like two quite different spaces.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think I had I've always got quite ridiculously sort of, I don't know, ridiculous timescales that I give myself. I don't meet the timescales. Not like I'm ridiculously productive. I'm not, but I kind of I'm gonna, you know, write a whole first draft by. I think my idea is to get it done by Christmas. That's one of my.
Wow.
But actually, you know, I don't know, because publishing is even publishing remotely, kind of as we are now, and not doing all the events, and traveling, it still feels to me like quite different.
You're in a different headspace. And also I think with a book like the Harpy, it would be hard to get out of that headspace. I can imagine I'm still kind of in the Bass Rock, in a part of my brain. I'm sure you are in yours. And we've got 1 minute left, so I just thought I'd hold out. Buy it.
And one thank you. Thank you for an amazing book and for chatting to me. I kind of want to go on.
I hope to see you in the flesh soon.
Pub one day and have a more normal conversation.
Yeah.
Everyone watching, sorry I can't interact with you, but hello, thank you.
There are lunatics out there.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye.
Bye.